Hey, welcome back to the channel. And so today I'm hoping this will be a shorter video. And I've played with it a little bit, and there's going to be a pairing with this. So this is Zen and the Art of the Swimming Pool, or Zen and the Swimming Pool. And specifically, what does that have to do with the price of tea? The swimming pool is actually it's a bit of a metaphor for me with looking at different traditions in Zen and sort of how some traditions are treated over others. So I want to talk about that, and specifically I want to talk a little bit about a couple of things in relation to the Plum Village Tradition, because so the Plum Village Tradition, established by the Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh, has been accused might be a strong word, but there are a lot of people that talk about the tradition, and they tend to be a little bit derogatory at times and dismissive of the tradition. And so I wanted to look into this a little bit myself, and I have done a little bit of looking into this myself to see whether it's a valid argument as to whether, first of all, is the Plum Village tradition a new tradition in Buddhism, or is it really attached to its Linji or Rinzai in Japanese roots? Because my Soto teacher was curious about it. Would it be considered a Rinzai off branch, or is it considered something entirely on its own? So I want to talk a little bit about that. And then the second piece is one of the things about the Plum Village tradition that it's been sort of as dismissed as is, this inch deep, mile wide tradition, not very deep, not particularly profound, sort of catering to, a simple elementary message and not really offering much more of depth. And that one I have some strong opinions on, because, I've been practicing in the tradition for a fair bit. And one of the things about me, and when I start practicing in a tradition, it's not like once a week. It's not like 3 times a week. It's almost everyday thing for me. And that involves practice, and that involves study. And so I want to talk a little bit about the Plum Village tradition using sort of the metaphor of the swimming pool. So in terms of addressing the first part, is Plum Village, is it a new tradition in Buddhism, or is it simply just sort of an outgrowth of another tradition? And I've sat with that for a little bit, and I think, this is going to be one of those debatable things. Some people are going to agree and some people don't. First and foremost, obviously it's a lineage, right? That's traceable back through Thich Nhat Hanh to his teachers, back to the Buddha. So it's a valid lineage, and Thich Nhat Hanh, he received what we call Dharma transmission, and transmission of the lamp. Like, he was a valid teacher, well-versed in both the intellectual side of Buddhism as well as the practical side, which is actually fairly rare. Not to say that, a lot of Buddhist teachers don't understand, like if you're in Soto, for instance, don't understand Dogen, or don't understand the sutras and that sort of thing. One of the things I have come across is I haven't met a lot of Soto teachers that have read Genjo or Shobogenzo, not Genjo Koan. Everybody's read Genjo Koan if you're a Soto teacher. Shobogenzo from cover to cover. I don't know too many people who have gone all the way through all the essays of Dogen. Maybe they have, I don't know, but I think it's a lot rarer than I think a lot of people think it is. And so there's that study capacity, right? And then, academic study as well, linguistic study. How many Zen teachers are familiar with classical Chinese, Sanskrit, etc. And one of the things about Thich Nhat Hanh that made him stand out a little bit in terms of what he brought in terms of establishing the Plum Village tradition is that he had the academic side as well as the practice side. So he was well practiced and, really pushed the engaged Buddhism piece that had developed before him, certainly, but he became, in a sense, its fullest flower, from engaged Buddhism to applied Buddhism, which is sort of an offshoot of engaged Buddhism. But Thich Nhat Hanh was also serious academic, so he's fluent in classical Chinese. I think he spoke or understood a little bit of Sanskrit. I could be wrong on that one, but he definitely understood read and write in English, read and write in Vietnamese. He understood classical Chinese, so he was actually able to look at texts in classical Chinese where, a lot of Zen went from India to China, and then from China out to Japan to Vietnam, etc. And so he's got that academic side of him. And he was well versed in the Rinzai tradition, and he also studied other branches of Buddhism. But he also had to him a study of Christianity and Western philosophy, which is what makes him a little bit different than a lot of other Zen teachers, because he was able to sort of situate the tradition within sort of the unconscious stream of Christianity that pervades sort of most of European and certainly North American culture and South American culture. So he was able to find places where he could plant, sort of that more traditional Zen message within a little bit of a context of Western Christianity. And so it's one of the things that he's unique. There's not a lot of people that have that depth of understanding that were able to do that. They sort of, the history of Zen in the West for the most part is teacher comes from Japan or China or somewhere else, sets up a temple, and everything is sort of based around what that transplant was from that culture. And it may or may not grow depending on who's there. And some teachers were a little bit more adept at speaking to the cultural elements and that sort of thing, and how to sort of work that in. But Thich Nhat Hanh was different because he actually, from the beginning, included he had an understanding of Western philosophy and certainly Christianity, and so he was able to situate that, sort of the Zen stuff, in a language that was automatically kind of in the flow of that river, if you will. And so that's part of the reason why I was able to take root sort of in the West, and that's why it's the biggest lineage of Buddhism in the West. Why they have it's the tradition with the most monastics in the West, right? It's the Plum Village tradition. It's because he didn't have to kind of work it in after the fact. He came in with the Plum Village tradition, the order of interbeing, etc., right away. So is it new? Is the Plum Village tradition a new school of Buddhism? And after some reflection myself, my opinion on it is the Plum Village tradition is something new. It's not classical Rinzai. It's not class. It draws from a number of Mahayana sources. It draws from Theravada sources, and heavily from the Rinzai tradition for sure. Heavily from the Zen, significantly. But it's not. It's certainly not the temple culture of Rinzai Zen. It's there's a lot of those teachings, but then the broader Mahayana piece, and then some of the Theravada. And so what I want to do is I actually just want to read a small piece from the Order of Interbeing's charter in relation to, what it deems to be the basic sutras, teachings, and methods of the Plum Village tradition. And I think you'll see sort of where Thich Nhat Hanh is coming from. The Order of Interbeing, the Plum Village tradition is sort of a large umbrella in terms of the general teachings and followings of Thich Nhat Hanh. The Order of Interbeing, I liken it to it's called the core community in the tradition, and I liken it to basically being sort of the scaffolding for the Plum Village tradition. It's kind of what keeps it up and running in a way, because of the monastics and ordained lay men and women, who are sort of the continuation of the teaching, etc., in the Plum Village tradition from Thai. So it's sort of that root anchor. So let me read, it's just a couple paragraphs, couple sentences. The Order of Interbeing does not consider any sutra or group of sutras as its basic scripture. It draws inspiration from the essence of the Bodhidharma in all sutras. It does not accept systematic arrangements of the Buddhist teachings proposed by any school. That's the hint right there. It's not, it's not hitching itself to any one school. The Order of Interbeing seeks to realize the spirit of the Dharma in early Buddhism, as well as the development of that spirit through the history of the Sangha and its life and teachings in all Buddhist traditions. So it's pretty definitive that it's not attached to any one tradition. It's something new. Further, it goes, the Order of Interbeing considers all sutras, whether spoken by the Lord Buddha or compiled by later Buddhist generations, as Buddhist sutras. It is also able to find inspiration from the texts of other spiritual traditions, which is true. It considers the development of original Buddhism into new schools a necessity, and that's unique. I've never seen that in any other Buddhist tradition. I've studied Buddhism academically. In fact, most schools of Buddhism actually actively guard against that. Certainly the conversations about Soto Zen and, when does it become American Zen from Japanese Zen? Like, this is a big point of contention. Whereas Thich Nhat Hanh says it's necessary. It considers the development of original Buddhism into new schools a necessity to keep the spirit of Buddhism alive. That's it right there. Only by proposing new forms of Buddhist life can one help the true Buddhist perspective perpetuate. So in my opinion, I take that as to mean that the Plum Village is something new. It's not just a continuation of one particular school. It's something new. Now, the swimming pool is in all of this. One of the other criticisms of the Plum Village tradition is that it's too simplistic or elementary, and it doesn't really dive deep into intensive Buddhist practice. And when you're looking from the outside, that was actually one of my concerns originally too with the Plum Village tradition, is that it didn't go deep enough. But the reality is I actually had to take a look for myself and go in to see whether that is actually true. And what I've discovered over time in practicing is that it's not. So the metaphor of the swimming pool. Picture, if you will, a big Olympic-sized swimming pool, and pretend this Olympic-sized swimming pool has a very deep end, so it's got a dive tank, and it has a shallower end, not like kiddie shallow, but like, 3-4 feet deep, sort of a wading pool, if you will. And picture a slope down from that, from that area of the shallow end of the pool to the deep end. So my experience with traditional Soto is that it lives sort of in the dive tank. That when you jump into the deep end, and you swim right from the beginning. It's almost a character of the tradition and I would say this is definitely true of the traditional Rinzai, traditional Soto Zen, etc. You swim. And that's what a lot of people look for, and that's how a lot of people have had it Zen translated to them in the West. Why a lot of people, it's a little too austere for a lot of people, and a little bit too, it's too intensive right from the beginning. And why it takes a certain sort of character to dive into that deep end of the pool that not everybody's willing to make. What the accusation, if I can call it's not an accusation, but it's an observation that people make about the Plum Village tradition, is that it lives in the other end of the pool, and that it's in the wading pool, and it's not really serious, and it doesn't really have the full depth and exploration of traditional Rinzai or traditional Soto. And when you look at Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings, you look at sort of where a lot of people are. A lot of people who come to the Plum Village tradition, they do start in that wading pool because, they can find their feet at the bottom of the pool. They're, and then kind of get a sense of the water, and they can get a sense of them. So it's much more gradual and diving into the deep end of the pool. And for a lot of people, that's what they need, because it's something so new and different. And so if you're looking at Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings, a lot of the basic Dharma talks at retreats and that sort of thing are very much at that end of the pool. Books like, there's a ton of books that are sort of at that end of the pool. I would say, like Zen and the Art of Saving the Planet, for instance, are more that is sort of, it was Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings, but sort of some of the monastics sort of, wrote it out. Zen and the Art of Living, to a certain extent, I would put it a little bit closer to the middle of the pool, but certainly a lot of Thai's written works sort of flow to the popular ones, the ones that people sort of gravitate towards, are at sort of that shallower end of the pool. And there's nothing wrong with that, because it allows people to experience the character and flavor of this, not having to start treading water right from the beginning. However, one of the things that once you scratch and once you dig a little bit more into the tradition, there does exist, and I would say it's more amongst the monastics, but not exclusively, certainly dedicated OI, lay order of interbeing practitioners and teachers are very aware of all this too, is Thai wrote a bunch of books, fairly detailed commentaries about some significant sutras, And also in Vietnamese it was written, but it hasn't been translated into English yet. The 40 tenets of the Plum Village Tradition, which are basically the root teachings. A lot of these aren't known to most Plum Village practitioners. In fact, I posted something recently because I'd gotten a couple of the sutra commentaries, and some long-lasting, very lovely practitioners in the Plum Village Tradition. Like, I had no idea that these even existed. I'd never heard of them before. They're not ones that you find on the bookshelf at Chapters in Canada or Barnes & Noble in the States, typically. You have to kind of order them from Parallax or Amazon, and you have to kind of know what you're looking for to find them. The 40 Tenets of Buddhism, there's a series of 40 videos on YouTube, and they're extremely dense. They're as dense as anything I've seen coming out of the Soto tradition, most certainly. But most people don't know about them because that is deep into the pool stuff. And so is the Plum Village Tradition, is it a shallow kiddie pool? Or what is it? Well, it's actually, and this is part of the genius of Thich Nhat Hanh in my perspective, it is that large Olympic swimming. It encompasses the length and breadth of the large Olympic swimming pool. It starts at the shallow end and has a very deep dive tank at the other end. It's just most people in the tradition don't necessarily find themselves in the deep end of the pool. A lot of them stay at the shallow end or somewhere in the middle. And then very few actually go into the deep end of the pool, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And certainly the senior teachers within the tradition, they all hang out in the deep end of that pool. So Brother Paplu at Deer Park is the one who does a lot of the videos for the 40 Tenets. It's deep stuff. It's intense stuff. It exists. So the Plum Village Tradition is it's not what a lot of people see it as from first glance. You have to dig into it a little bit, but it is just as deep as any of the Soto traditions in the U.S., the Rinzai traditions in the U.S., and the teachings are just as rich. In some cases, even richer, because Thai had an understanding of classical Chinese. Thai had an understanding of the original languages, and he pulls on a lot more of the sutras than a lot of Soto teachers do, or Rinzai teachers do. And so there's a depth that actually doesn't really exist in the Soto tradition. It's not as apparent, right? Everybody looks at the shallow end of the pool because it's an easier way to get into the pool. But trust me, there's a deep end if you go looking for it. So if you doubt me, have a look at some of the sutra commentaries. Like Thai does a full book on Linji's commentary on Linji's works, and it's pretty impressive. And then some of the other sutras as well. It's not for the faint of heart. It's much deeper than things like Zen and the Art of Saving the Planet and the happiness books, etc. The little one-liner books, the little paragraph of Thai's teachings, right? It's intensive stuff. So that's my opinion, is Plum Village Tradition, not only is it a new school of Buddhism, but it's just as intense, just as deep as in some areas as any of the other Buddhist traditions in the West.